560 The Answer.
Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The adjustment period deepens. Trump yesterday announcing a 25% tariff on all cars not made in the United States. That will start on April 3rd, the day after he is set to announce a broader slate of trade actions. Tariffs will cover finished automobiles and automotive parts. The consideration to exempt auto parts had considered exempting auto parts. Parts that are compliant with the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, will remain tariff-free until the Commerce Department, quote, establishes a process to apply tariffs to their non-U.S. content. 25% tariff will be added on top of existing duties, including a 2.5% tariff currently imposed by the U.S., as well as existing 25% tariffs on light trucks. They would also be added on top of the 25% tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico Trump imposed because he said those countries weren't doing enough to disrupt fentanyl and the cartels. Negotiations there are continuing. Of course, this drew a response from the new and hopefully temporary Canadian PM, Mark Carney, saying it was a direct attack on Canadian workers, clear violation, betrayed our trade agreement. Strong words. Maybe Trump will decide that he would rather not work with the leftist in Canada. Maybe he will reconsider pushing in a productive way Poilievre in that April 28th election that has been called. Anyway, the impact of those tariffs and other matters economic, for a discussion of that, we're pleased to be joined again by Christopher Whalen, investment banker, chairman of Whalen Global Advisors, LLC. He's also the editor of the Institutional Risk Analyst and the author of the soon-to-be-released book, Inflated, Money, Debt, and the American Dream. That's the second edition. Chris Whalen, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy.
So your take on the tariffs?
Donald Trump is essentially tearing up 75 years of history and taking us back to really World War II before the Bretton Woods Agreement that enshrined the dollar as a global currency. And what he's doing is saying we want reciprocity. The U.S. media is incapable of understanding this because the Democrats basically wrote the financial and economic history of the U.S. Really over the last century, going back to World War I. They've always been against tariffs. They've always been, against a number of things that are related to that. And I think what people don't really understand is that even if it wasn't Donald Trump, even if it was someone else, Americans have grown weary of running a utility for the rest of the world called the global dollar. There was an interesting interview in the Financial Times, I think 2 weeks back on Saturday, with the finance minister of India, who's a very interesting man. And he said, look, this is no surprise. We need to rebalance because the U.S. can't afford to do this anymore. Whether you're talking about trade deficits or the fiscal deficits, we have essentially accommodated the world by growing our currency and our debt. And they find it very convenient, right? But they don't pay for it. We do. American consumers pay for it. So I think that's what's going on here. Trump is using tariffs to try and change our relationship with other nations. And I think it's all for the good. I'm in a funny position, which you guys will appreciate. I am very supportive of President Trump, but I also work in the housing and financial ghettos, and I have to occasionally point out to some of his minions when they're making big mistakes, as I did this week with Bill Pulte. I had to force him to come out in public and say that they're not going to prosecute.
You're breaking up on Chris. You're breaking up on us.
Can you repeat? Yeah.
We had some fun because a lot of people in the mortgage industry were worried that administration was going to drop the limit on conforming loans, which is half of the mortgage industry. And fortunately, they came out and said they're not going to do that. But, a lot of the other changes are great. And I look forward to following this process over the course of the next 4 years.
Well, I mean, you look forward to following the process over the course of the next 4 years. I mean, what do you anticipate? If this is something that extends this tit for tat or reciprocity, if you want, extends for the next 12 months, say, ratcheting up first with the Canadians and the Mexicans and then maybe the Europeans and perhaps even in Southeast Asia, at least according to the Dirty 15 list that Scott Bessent put out. So what do you think the impact would be?
It's going to force people to invest in this country. Look at Hyundai. Hyundai just announced a multi-billion-dollar investment in production here in the United States. And whether it's Mexico, Canada, or specifically inside the U.S., that's fine. We need to rebalance. We can't have the Chinese act as a mercantilist predator state, essentially destroying the industries in the U.S. and Europe. The Europeans have figured this out, by the way. They have a very negative view of the Chinese. And I think Americans need to listen a little bit better to some of the things Donald Trump and his colleagues in the administration have been saying about China. Because, how do we deal with a state that is anti-liberal? We have the same problem with Russia. They reject everything about Western liberalism going back to the Reformation, okay? So it's hard to have a balanced relationship with a state like that because they don't care. All they want is market share. They want to destroy industry.
Right. And so, I mean, so that this is interesting what you're suggesting in terms of compelling people to make significant investments in the United States because that is happening. It's not just Hyundai's $20 billion. The tally right now in Trump's first 100 days with both foreign direct investment from governments, UAE, Saudi Arabia, as well as major manufacturers, Hyundai, Apple, NVIDIA, SoftBank, Johnson & Johnson, Eli Lilly, Merck, is $2.924 trillion worth of investments have been announced so far. I mean, that's significant, and you're suggesting that that's a harbinger of more to come.
Oh, definitely. Years ago, my father, Richard Whalen, and I wrote a book called Trade Warriors. This was when Japan was the big trade boogeyman, right? And we interviewed members of Congress and said, why do you care? What is it about your constituency that drives your views on trade? Today, most members of Congress don't have views on trade. They don't have views on much of anything, really. And so that's, to me, the interesting change is that we as a country are essentially forced to make changes because of our financial position. And getting large companies to put productive facilities in the U.S. and employ Americans is a good thing.
Now, just as a point of contrast, I understand that there's a lot of differences between the position of Argentina and America, but in terms of moving in a Doge direction, Milei was doing it before Trump was. One of the things that the Argentinians have done in terms of cutting and deregulating, the elimination of an import licensing scheme that has led to a 20% drop in the price of clothing items and a 35% drop in the price of home appliances. Over-the-counter medicines can now be sold not just by pharmacies but by other businesses as well. This has resulted in online sales and price drops. So, there is still that argument about looking at the economy through the eyes of the consumer and, a la Sam Walton, improving the purchasing price of, middle-income Americans or even low to middle-income Americans.
Well, no, that's absolutely right. My friend Seitan Motley said in his blog the other day that there are a lot of Americans who can't afford to go to Walmart, and that's why Donald Trump won the last election. Being impact of inflation on all of our citizens is something we have to focus on more. We just assumed it was okay, and it's not okay.
Yeah, but my point is that taxes, which was what tariffs are, increase the prices decrease purchasing power, don't they?
Yes. Well, they do. For example, in Europe, they have non-tariff barriers within the European that are worse than anything Donald Trump is proposing. They treat one another horribly when it comes to trade within the EU. And for American companies...
Chris, you're fading on us again.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I guess we have to turn off the earbuds.
Yes. Or don't move around.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
finish your answer about the EU and this matter of reducing purchasing price at the same time the tariffs are going to bring this this foreign direct investment and even U.S. based investment. So how does that net out?
Well, that's a very good question. You know, in the period of, say, the last 50 to 75 years, the U.S. was always adding to the pool. In other words, we were growing demand because we were willing to finance it, right? With the dollar, with debt, however we did it. And then other countries would recycle their investments back into the U.S. It would cause problems. In fact, 2008 was in large part caused by China because they were recycling money into the U.S. housing market. So now what we're saying is we're kind of going back to the world of national treatment of the 1950s. And it may result in less trade over time between nations. But on the other hand, if we have more employment in the U.S. and we can be more self-sufficient in terms of key things like steel and other components that we need to defend ourselves in the event of war, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, but 25% tariffs on all automobiles and foreign auto parts. I know Trump is using that, to try to get these manufacturers to move back into the United States and hire Americans. But is that going to work on any of these companies?
It won't. No, it won't work in that sense, Amy. But what we want is the Europeans to take down their barriers on U.S. products. Look at General Motors. They can barely do business in Europe because of the non-tariff barriers. Ford has been run out of a lot of these markets. So, it comes down to whether or not we want to have reciprocal relationships or relationships that are not reciprocal. And Trump is challenging the world. The world hasn't had this kind of discussion in a long time.
Well, he seems to also be challenging the concept of comparative advantage in the sense of where we don't have a comparative advantage, he wants one back. Right? I mean, isn't that what he's doing?
Well, everyone does.
Right? But he wants. I don't want to say autarky, but he wants America to be more autonomous, at least in more sectors than it is currently.
Correct. I think that's an accurate statement.
I wanted to get your reaction to something locally too. I saw you post on X about it as well. This Sterling Bay development, Lincoln Yards in Chicago. A buddy of mine, I teased it, and a buddy of mine texted me on this. Very interesting. I'm sure this will come as no surprise to you. Sterling built a 300,000 square foot lab and office building just north of the Home Depot at the south end of Lincoln Yards. It's 100% vacant. It's been done for more than a year. And, of course, we saw the news about Banco ZK writing down millions of dollars more on its loan to Sterling Bay. So what's your handle on that development and its larger implications?
Well, I think we knew that Chicago was a difficult market for many respects, not just commercial real estate, but residential. I am astounded that Banco ZK, who are pretty astute people, would even go into that market. It just blows. And you know who was with them? J.P. Morgan Asset Management, for God's sake. What were they doing? What were they? They obviously don't listen to your show.
Yeah, right. Yeah, a lot of people don't.
Well, no, but you know what I'm saying? It's pretty obvious that Chicago is a market today that you have to be very careful of. Until we see political change in Chicago, I don't think people should go there.
Well, don't hold your breath. That's not going to happen anytime soon.
Well, don't. I mean,
all right, you can move to Indiana.
People are fleeing like it's on fire, like the place is on fire. There's no question. But I mean, the Sterling Bay story is a cautionary tale just about Chicago, or is a cautionary tale about major developments in urban centers, or both?
Major developments in urban centers. There is a really big problem, as you know, in commercial and also in multifamily real estate apartment buildings. And what we see on the horizon now is high-end homes. All across the Southeast, Southwest, you have these $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 spec homes, both condos and single-family residences that are not selling, and they're flipping in the rentals. And you see Blackstone and Lennar trying to rent houses that they can't sell. That is a bad sign.
So, okay, well, that's interesting. I know you wrote over at your site, Institutional Risk Analyst, about this confab between Bill Pulte and Scott Turner, the HUD director. What is the import of what they're looking to do to make housing more affordable?
Well, there's a couple of agendas here. A lot of our conservative friends in Washington have been waiting decades to downsize the government's role in housing. So they would like to see Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac basically get out of multifamily, get out of second homes, home equity loans, and also anything else that is not a purchase mortgage. What that means is that interest rates, effective cost to consumers are going to go up. The other really interesting thing, though, and we'll talk about this more as the year goes on, is that the multifamily sector is the big pain point right now in the world of finance. Banks are taking 100% losses on many existing loans, and more importantly, they are not taking over the assets. In other words, when the loan goes delinquent, they don't take the building. They don't want the building because the city where it's located is going to force them to take care of it and the maintenance costs and everything else. So this is an evolving story that we're going to hear a lot more about because in today's market, especially after 4 years of Joe Biden, the multifamily sector is the new subprime, guys. And the losses that banks and investors are going to take on this are going to be quite significant.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
new
interesting.
Subprime.
That's interesting. I mean, because
government subprime.
Well, but if you know, I'm like I guess I need this teased out a little bit more because at the same time, we're saying people can't afford to buy homes because of the spike in home prices over the last several years. I mean, I know that's cooling off a bit, but it's still well above where it was 3 years ago in most places. And that was good for renters, not necessarily rentees, because there were more rentees. But now you're saying that's somehow flipped.
Yes, it has. And I'll tell you, it's interesting. The high-end market, you know, they have a problem selling homes. Okay, that's fine. We're not going to shed too many tears over them. But at the bottom of the scale, that 20-25% low-income families who mostly finance with the FHA, they are also in terrible straits. We have delinquency rates on FHA loans today of almost 14-15%. And there's a whole float out there of a couple 100,000 families that are essentially in endless forbearance that have not been foreclosed on. Eventually, the Trump people are going to clean this out. So much like the end of Obama and also to some extent Trump won, we have a mess we have to clean up. And nobody's really talking about this. They don't want to talk about it, frankly. But you're going to definitely hear about it.
No, they certainly are not talking about it. So what do you assess the potential impact on the larger economy to be of this mess?
Well, for banks and other investors in these properties are going to take losses. That's a professional, institutional market that we don't hear a lot about. You know, they're not consumers, so there's no political constituency to shed tears over that.
Right.
But you're also going to see increased foreclosures this year for consumers, and that's going to be a pain point that is going to get a lot of public attention.
Chris Whalen is investment banker, chairman of Whalen Global Advisors, editor of the Institutional Risk Analyst, and author of the soon-to-be-released Inflated, Money, Debt, and the American Dream. That's the second edition. Chris Whalen, thanks for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
Have a great day, guys.
Thank you. You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
Attention American homeowners, your